This is a review of Watching the Watchmen by Dave Gibbons and published by Titan in 2008. So Titan released a few books to tie in with the release of the Watchmen movie, but this was the only book that specifically focused on the graphic novel. And although I've read the graphic novel twice and seen the movie twice, and I thought they were both really good, especially the graphic novel, I think, is very much deserving of its high place in the realm of comics. But I don't really think I would call myself a fan. It's not really my type of thing. So this companion book, Watching the Watchmen, isn't exactly on something that I'm particularly enthusiastic about. So in a personal sense, I didn't find it that exciting. However, I had a very real sense of sort of vicarious excitement, like excitement on behalf of fans of Watchmen, because I think this is just such an impressive book. Though it definitely is for a specific type of fan, so hopefully this review will help you decide if the book meets your expectations. If you've ever got any sort of collected edition of a comic, in the back, oftentimes they'll have like just a couple of pages of extras, whether that's like character sketches or cover sketches or other little behind the scenes things. And so this book sort of takes that concept but then expands it into a complete book, and such a physically impressive book. Like there's no bells or whistles to any of the contents or the actual book itself. It just has this really great and satisfying weight and size without being overwhelming. And in fact, Watchmen has had many different editions, absolute edition, deluxe edition, special editions, and they often include like those sort of extras at the back. So I'm not actually sure how much of an overlap between this book and those editions are, but obviously this book is going to have a lot more of that content and tons of stuff that you won't see anywhere else. And they also released a version of this book called the Diamond Edition, which is really just a different cover and signed by Dave Gibbons, you know, your usual special edition junk. And it's just so cool to have a behind-the-scenes sort of book for a comic book, because comics rarely get any sort of companion books. And while this book does have some great sort of making of information, it is very much an art book. The focus is on the art, which is perhaps unsurprising because the author, Dave Gibbons, is the artist of the Watchmen comics. So what I think is so cool about this book, and probably the best way to describe it, it's almost like a time machine that is taking you back and giving you access to Dave Gibbons' office while he was working on the comic, and just giving you sort of free access. And so obviously there's tons and tons of sketches and other sort of artworks, but it's also filled out with like other sort of documentation and notes and like script pages with like Dave Gibbons highlighting on them, or handwritten notes from Alan Moore, or just all these great documents. And I love the way the images are presented in this book. They're not just treated as like clean art prints. They've been photographed and presented like they're artifacts, like they're actual objects. So you can see like the bent and crinkled edges and the texture of the paper, and everything's just so large and so well presented. Some might say some of the images are actually presented too large, like sometimes, a tiny little sketch or something will take up a whole page, and you think, well, it didn't really need to be that big. Surely they could have, fit more on that page. But because the book has so many pages, you don't actually really feel like you're ever being cheated. And it just has this real sense of thoroughness, like this is the complete collection of Watchmen behind-the-scenes documents. Although sometimes it does feel perhaps a little too thorough when you're going, page after page of these rough thumbnail page layouts, which most people are probably going to find very tedious. But then again, there are also probably a set of fans who are, again, really going to appreciate this level of thoroughness and completeness. Although the selection is not always without its flaws. One specific example that comes to mind is at the very start of the book, you see a photograph of the first page of the outline that Alan Moore wrote for Dave Gibbons describing the world, and it's really candid and interesting, and you can see just from the way that the document's photographed, you can see that there are actually at least 4 other pages to this proposal, but they don't actually appear anywhere else in the book. And so you turn the page, and then suddenly you've got this giant 2-page spread that just features like 1 and 2 half Rorschach mask designs, which is kind of weird, especially because later in the book there is a whole page of like a grid of 9 Rorschach mask designs, and so it's just kind of weird that they would waste the space on that when they could have used it to reproduce the rest of this pitch letter. But obviously that's just one very specific, isolated criticism I noticed. In a more general sense, the biggest criticism for this book that I've also read a lot of other readers have found is the real lack of text. The book probably has fewer than 20 pages of text, which for a book this size is just not even nearly enough. The text that is there by Dave Gibbons is kind of his experience from making the comic all the way up to its release. And that's really good. And then also other sections that focus on more the actual process of creating the graphic novel, but kind of in a very general sense, and it really could have benefited from being fleshed out a lot more. But there is absolutely not even nearly enough text in this book, and you really get that sense of it's missing a lot of in-depth insight, especially when it comes to like character development, story development. There's absolutely none of that. And even though it would have been cool had Alan Moore been able to contribute to this book, Dave Gibbons really was a creative partner in this. And so he's definitely privy to the entire creative process and evolution. And so the fact that the book's really lacking that is very disappointing. And especially when, I'll just read a couple of phrases from the, just from the dust jacket, from the blurbs. It says stuff like, "Never before revealed secrets include early versions of the series' iconic characters, notes chronicling the work's evolution, including discarded concepts, secret origins, and occasional misadventures." And then again on the back it says, "with its in-depth exploration of discarded concepts, secret origins, and blah blah blah." So those parts I just read to you are not an exaggeration. They are a straight up 100% lie. This book has none of that stuff I mentioned, and for them to mention it 3 times just on the dust jacket, and I'm sure they did in other marketing material, is so bizarre, because it's like, you have an excellent book here, you have a really great product. Why do you feel the need to build up unrealistic expectations with your reader? I can't recall any discarded concepts, and certainly no in-depth exploration of the characters. You know, there might be like one sketch where Night Owl has a slightly different cowl, or Rorschach has a full body suit instead of just the mask, but absolutely nothing that warrants those types of promises. And I'm absolutely not saying this to be harsh or to discourage anyone from getting the book, because like I've said, I do think it's fantastic. It's just I want to make sure that this book meets your expectations. But yeah, so even though that lack of text and sort of making of is really disappointing, the reason that I specifically decided to review this book this week is because they have just released the annotated Watchmen. Now, I haven't seen it, so I can't recommend it one way or the other. And I know if you're a big Watchmen fan, it's probably like, ugh, now I have to buy yet another edition of this comic. But I suspect, I'm hoping, that the annotations in that edition will actually provide a lot of text that will make up for the deficiencies with this book. And so I'm hoping that you'll be able to pair this new annotated Watchmen with this excellent Watching the Watchmen for a really, really fulfilling Watchmen experience.